We're probably at one of those big historical turning points. I remember, I look back to, 1923, 24, after the First World War. The country was very unsettled and all kind of issues arising from the war. And the Liberal Party just disappeared, more or less, in the space of a couple of elections. It had been the, dominant party for a century, and they just went. And they've come back in as part of the Lib Dems, but actually the party died, really, and was replaced by the Labour Party. And I think we're maybe at that kind of turning point again. I think it's very plausible to imagine that Reform are one of the two parties that will emerge from all this. I would like to think the Lib Dems are the other, but yeah, I take the basic point that I think we're in a state of potential upheaval.
We've really enjoyed being involved in non-league football, and I don't know, I find myself watching the Premier League less.
Yeah. Well, I occasionally get to the Emirates.
Okay.
I've got a friend who's a season ticket who gets me in from time to time. But most of my recent football, I was the MP for Twickenham for 20 years. I used to go around and watch Hampton and Richmond Rangers. It was I think they were 6th tier, now 5th tier, I think.
No, they're 6th tier?
7th to 6th. They went from 7 to 6th.
We played them pre-season.
Ah.
We did, and we won.
Yeah.
Not at Hampton.
Yeah, it's the one where Michelle.
You lost me, Con.
Gate 250. I mean, not great, but good community side.
We get about 400 now. We've had the team for 3 years. We get about 400 now, but it's because we were driving the other day, and Connor said to me, he said, correct me if I'm wrong here, Con. You said, isn't football weird? That you just go along for this couple of hours and you focus so intently on this team winning. And we started talking about, what does it actually mean to win a football match?
Yeah.
Does it actually mean anything afterwards?
Well, it's 2 hours, but it's a day, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're working up. You go to the pub before with your mates. You have a post-mortem afterwards. It's then you watch stuff on the telly. I mean, it is a way of life if you take it seriously.
I think it's escape as well.
Yeah.
It's possibly an escape that people need right now.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it's great to meet you, Vince. I was really excited about this interview. I was explaining to Connor, you're a politician a bit from my younger years. Yeah. But we had Anne Widdecombe in here recently.
Yeah.
She said something very interesting. She said the trajectory she thinks of this country is that in the not too distant future, the two main political parties will be Reform and the Lib Dems. And that she thinks there's essentially an existential crisis for both Labour and Conservatives.
Yeah.
How do you feel about it?
Well, I think there's an element of truth. I think she's right to say that we're probably at one of those big historical turning points. I remember, I look back to, 1923, 24, after the First World War. The country was very unsettled and all kind of issues arising from the war. And the Liberal Party just disappeared, more or less, in the space of a couple of elections. It had been the, dominant party for a century, and they just went. And they've come back in as part of the Lib Dems, but actually the party died, really, and was replaced by the Labour Party. And I think we're maybe at that kind of turning point again. I think it's very plausible to imagine that Reform are one of the two parties that will emerge from all this. I would like to think the Lib Dems are the other, but yeah, I take the basic point that I think we're in a state of potential upheaval.
And why do you think that is? What do you think? What are your observations of what's happening right now?
Well, I think a mixture of things. I mean, it's very easy. And I'm now a retired politician.
Yes.
I can say things more freely than I did when I was speaking to a party message. But I think we've been hit by a whole series of big shocks, and I think underestimated actually how serious they were. I mean, the first was the financial crisis, which actually knocked the stuffing out of the country.
2008.
Yeah, and it meant that the 5 years I was in the cabinet, we were having to do very, very painful things to try and get the country's finances sorted, and people didn't like it, right? You were just beginning to recover from that you had Brexit, which was a big shock. I mean, given my politics, it was a bad shock, but people have a different view about that. But it was certainly a big shock. And it meant that the country was completely preoccupied for 5 years with an issue that didn't really help us in terms of the country getting back on its feet. Then we had the pandemic. And then after that, the Ukraine war, the impact on oil prices. So we've been, it's like, somebody in late middle age, hit by a succession of heart attacks. Right? I think that's basically what's happened. And so the sort of country is sort of weary, disillusioned, doesn't quite know where to go, and doesn't have any real sense of direction.
Do you feel like the public have a right to be upset at the establishment?
Well, I think in a democracy, the public is always right by definition. But I think it's not just political failures. There have been, but of the shocks I mentioned, 3 of them weren't really driven by the political class. I mean, they were beyond the control of government. I think where the politicians have failed and failed very badly is overpromising. I mean, it's part of my party's sad history that, we made this ridiculous promise on university fees, and, I was the minister who had to put an end to it because it just wasn't deliverable. And you then, massive loss of trust problem, which kept going for several years. Brexit was sold on a false prospectus. People, I think, now angry about that. We had very worthy efforts, I think, to protect the public from the worst of COVID, and basically paying people not to work. And of course, that piles up debt, and that debt's got to now be paid for and serviced. But it wasn't explained at the time. So people have been promised stuff. The Tories with their 100,000 net immigration. I mean, we've had a succession of elections where people, the winning party's gone in with wild promises that they couldn't possibly deliver. And so at the end of it, people are pretty sickened by the whole thing. And one of the big difficulties with this government is not that they've made enormous mistakes, I think they have, but they went in this election knowing perfectly well, I think, that the public finances were in a very bad way because essentially we'd been financing the COVID and the rest of it. But they made this ridiculous promise that they were never going to raise taxes on income tax, value-added tax, and so on, which they were going to have to do. So they cornered themselves by making a promise that couldn't be delivered. So to get back to your basic question, if the politicians have failed, it's by making promises that they can't deliver. And I think that you can't criticize the public, but the public have believed them and perhaps shouldn't have.
I mean, you've been involved in politics for a long time. Has the character and makeup of the type of people that we have as politicians changed a lot?
It's changed somewhat. First, women. When I first went into Parliament, there were quite a small number of women, and they were considered characters. Either like Margaret Thatcher, they were strong and very distinctive, or they emphasised femininity, but there were very few women. Now it hasn't quite got up to 50-50, but it's much more balanced. There were hardly any representatives of ethnic minorities, black or Asian. Now it's commonplace. We've had an Asian prime minister, black leader of the opposition. This is fundamentally different. And professionally, I think what has happened, you've got more and more professional politicians who've been to university, done a few years working as a researcher to an MP or in a trade union or some charity or lobby group, and then they get a seat in Parliament, and then after a few years they expect to be in the cabinet. There aren't many people who have been out there working for a few decades, whether in a factory or a coal mine or in the professions. It hasn't happened. I mean, I got into Parliament aged 54. I mean, I was regarded as an old man by the time I'd actually started my political career. And so in that sense, there's been quite a big change.
What were you doing up until then?
Well, I did lots of stuff. I mean,
I'm really asking, what's the experience that because you're saying we have career politicians.
I worked and travelled in different parts of the world: Africa, Latin America, India. I got a flavour of what the world was like. I worked in government. I worked in one of these think tanks. I worked for the last 7 years before I got into Parliament with Shell, the international oil company, and went around the world doing scenario planning, giving economic advice. So I had a good sense of what was happening in the big wide world and in the private sector as well as the public sector. And I knew a fair amount about certain things. And the challenge for me actually going to politics was getting embedded in my local community, because I was one of these dreadful globalists, as they're called, and I was having to learn how to be a grassroots guy. That was the hard bit for me.
I guess what I was getting at is, what is it about your time in business that shaped you politically that we possibly miss by people being career politicians? What is it? What happened for you personally?
Well, I think actually, certainly the company I worked for wasn't exceptional. Shell is one of these multinational companies that's been around forever, but highly professional. The sense that you're in a competitive world. And that actually, it may seem strange, but actually working in the private sector, I was having to think long term the whole time.
Yeah.
We make a big decision on, investing in a big oil field. It's got implications 20 years ahead, whereas politics it's about tomorrow. 24-hour news cycles, very, very difficult to get people to think about the future and how you shape it.
And that's probably points to the issue that you identified, whereby politicians aren't maybe giving us the truth because they're thinking about the next election and the next cycle and what is it we have to do to get power.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. I'm not sure I want to frame it as a kind of an attack on politicians, because in democracy that is the nature of the beast
and the reality of life.
The reality of life. I mean, I've just come from quite a lot of visits to China, where I was doing a few talks in universities and so on in China, and they've got a highly competent autocracy where things work. You have brilliant infrastructure, but would I really want to live there? No. I think in all our sort of messiness and short-termism, I'd much prefer to live here.
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines, the world's most responsible currency, the right way. Because the future depends on it.
So when you look at what's happening in the country right now, because for me, I mean, I'm 46, Vince. This feels the most fractured that I've known. Now, perhaps in the early 80s it was, and I was too young to recognise it.
I would have cited the early 80s, yeah.
Yeah, and I was probably too young to recognise it, because I remember the tail end of Margaret Thatcher. I remember her as a Prime Minister, and I remember early John Major. But the first real Prime Minister that I remember and caring about politics was Tony Blair. And the country felt alive at the time. I didn't vote for him, but it did feel alive at the time. My son's 21, and I mean, he should answer for himself, but it does feel like we're very fractured at the moment. And Con, how do things feel for you?
I mean, so last election would have been the first election I could have actually voted in, and I had no intention to whatsoever, just because of the mess and complete, I guess, feels like a bit of a circus going on at the minute. And I actually don't think anyone deserves my vote. And right now I continue to feel that way. It doesn't really feel like anyone's got.
But beyond that, when
This
you
stuff
talk,
together.
when you talk about how life feels for you,
Oh, there's not
and
much
Hitler,
future right now.
That's how he feels. This is the conversation we have most days.
Any of my mates, I would suggest, like, you are best off not in this country if you want some sort of future.
Yeah, but no, I'm not criticizing you, but I just wonder if your expectations are too high.
I don't think
If
so.
you looked at the parties, not in terms of giving you a future or a great vision, but, we've got problems. Who can deal with this a bit better than somebody else in a more practical way?
Sure.
Wouldn't that help?
Yes, maybe. I think it's just the general feeling of the country. It's like, I don't really think anyone's bold enough to do what actually needs to be done.
Ooh, that's a
Yeah,
good
but
joke.
that's the problem, because I hear this all the time. We've got to be bold. We've got to be decisive. We need vision. But then you actually say, well, what is it you want? Then people are saying exactly opposite things. And there isn't a clear, obvious way of changing things fundamentally for the better. I mean, there's a basic problem at the moment that the British economy isn't growing, right? So government tax revenue isn't coming in, so there isn't more to spend. So if you spend more on something, you've got to take it from somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's a zero-sum country. And the only way you change that fundamentally is by making the economy grow a bit bigger. But being realistic, we were growing at about 2.5% until the financial crisis, 2.5%. And we're now about 1%, right? So changing gear isn't going to make an enormous difference. It makes some difference. We're never going to be growing like China or Korea or India even. I mean, we're no longer a developing economy. We can no longer have those kind of dramatic shifts of gear which make a difference in emerging economies. We're in a mature, developed, you might say, relatively declining country, and it's not necessarily an awful thing. And there's a sort of basic choice. Do we become more like Denmark or Finland and have a bit more tax in order to have good public services? Or on the other hand, do we want to be more like, I don't know, the US, which is more freewheeling, less tax? That's the kind of choice you have to make. But when people say there is a way forward and I know what it is, they don't, because people are pulling in these two opposite directions.
It's kind of what we said this morning, isn't it? That the battle line appears to be one side wants more government, one side wants less government. It's essentially the battle line at the moment.
Yeah, but we're fighting over tiny little bits of territory, right? I mean, there's all this hullabaloo last year about the winter fuel allowance, right? It's just as an example. There's not very much money in terms of the bigger thing. It was obviously needed reforming because there's no way people like me should be getting it. So the only practical question was whether you abolish it altogether, which is sort of what they did, or whether you tax it. It's a kind of technical, some civil service type argument. But it became a kind of massive storm about, good and bad government. I couldn't get my head around why people were getting so worked up about it.
Is it because perhaps there is an anger and a disappointment, but people don't know where to direct it?
Yes.
They don't understand the basics of what they're frustrated about.
Yes, I think you're hitting on a deep theme here,
Yeah.
and I don't think either of us can quite express it with deep understanding. And there are people who are jumping very effectively onto that bandwagon of discontent. Nigel Farage, who I've known for 30 odd years, is a very skillful, articulate politician, is currently reaping the benefits of it. But somebody else may come along and do the same. This new guy from the Greens, or my party leader. Yes, that Polanski, I think his name is. Yeah. No, there is, as you say, a kind of simmering unhappiness, discontent, lack of direction. but there isn't any obvious solution.
Is that a lack of leadership then? We're lacking a uniting force within the country.
Yes, there is in one sense, and it goes back to the answer I gave earlier. My idea of leadership in the last election would be if party leader X came out and said, look, we have a whole lot of really difficult problems. We've inherited all this government debt because of the financial crisis, COVID, whatever. It's difficult. I can't promise you anything except Churchill's blood, sweat and tears. It's going to be hard. We're going to have to make some difficult choices. We will do our best. But nobody said that.
Bit of honesty.
What is needed is somebody to be just basically honest about the limited range of things that can be accomplished without kind of rapid economic growth.
Rather than pointing at a specific group.
Yeah, well, without pointing at particular, or for that matter, pointing at, with particular parties. I mean, I'm not a Tory. I mean, I've been fighting the Tories all my life. But I thought the whole idea that the last Conservative government was just utter complete rubbish, right?
Yeah.
The economy was an absolute mess because of what they did. It was nonsense. I mean, they didn't create COVID and they didn't create the Ukraine war, and they spent pots of money trying to protect people's income while it was happening. And that piled up a big debt problem, which is what we're now struggling with. So there was a black hole, an enormous black hole. It wasn't entirely because of bad political leadership. And similarly, people are, Rachel Reeves, I think, is a perfectly smart woman, an intelligent woman, made a few mistakes. But somehow or other, this woman is ruining the country. It just makes complete nonsense to me, this sort of excessive reaction against people who, in many ways, whether they're Tory or Labour, were doing their best.
Yeah, I'm not so sure on Rachel Reeves, in that she's made some mistakes that she was warned about the kind of what would happen if she raised the taxes. And I know people whose businesses have failed during this period. It's not entirely on her. As you said, this comes downstream from a tough economic situation that they inherited. If anything, one of the things I think about with the Labour Party, I think they've come into power at the wrong time for the kind of policies they want.
Yes, that's fair, yeah.
We kind of need the...
But I think what you're hinting at is that the employment levy, the employers' NICs, was a bad decision.
Yes, yeah.
It's affected employers and it's affecting employment. And I agree with you. And it goes back, I think, to the point I made earlier, that they went into the election with this ridiculous promise that we're not going to increase the basic taxes. So if you've landed yourself with an obligation that you can't increase the taxes, which make up 80% of government revenue, you're then forced to do all kind of other things, which is one of the few things they hadn't promised was the employers' NICs. So they did that, regardless of the economic fallout. So yeah, it was a bad decision, but it got because of something that had happened beforehand. I mean, the point I keep making, and it's not a popular message, even in my own party, that if you want to make Britain more like Denmark, which I guess is what, if you're a centre-left politician, you want to do, basically, value-added tax is 25%, income tax is substantially higher, and they pay it because they're confident that at the end of it, this money is going to be used to provide decent education, health, social care, and other things. So there's this kind of social contract. Whereas in this country, what we seem to be saying is that we want European levels of services, but we want American levels of tax. And, 2 + 2 doesn't equal 5.
They don't work together. Yeah, I wonder if culture, because you probably have as well, I've spent a bit of time in Scandinavia. Culturally, I think it feels a bit different. I don't think culturally we're set up in that way. Well,
I spent part of the summer in Scotland. I felt there much that we were the political culture was much more Scandinavian.
Interesting. In what way? How did you?
Well, it's the idea that people actually value it sounds a pompous phrase, but the public realm, right? They want decent services and they're willing to pay for them. And more of a sense of big community.
Yeah. So if you, when you're diagnosing what's happening in the country now, and you consider your position as obviously previous leader of the Lib Dems, and where it's now an opportunity for the Lib Dems, how do you think they capitalise on that?
Well, at the last election, Ed Davey, I think, was very skillful. Didn't try to overstate, didn't try to make grandiose promises, just concentrate on a couple of niche issues. Well, care isn't niche, but it's not top level. Water pollution, and then used all kind of quite clever gimmicks to highlight it. So he got attention. People were, many kind of what you might call one nation Tories, liberal Tories, were looking for an alternative to the Conservative Party, and we offered it. And almost all of our seats that we won were in relatively prosperous parts of the country. And with a combination of Labour tactical voters who wanted the Conservatives out and disillusioned Tories who thought that the Lib Dems were not too far from their basic philosophy of life. And the fact that we'd been in the coalition, we'd worked with the Tories for 5 years, actually, I thought quite productively in the national interest, probably bought us goodwill with that group of voters. So we've got to a certain point. We've now got as many MPs as our share of the national vote would justify. I think about 11-12% at the time of the
72 MPs, is it?
It's 72.
Yeah.
And the question is where you go next. And, there is a couple of options, really, which is one, steady as you go. We become a party that increasingly represents what you could broadly call the sensible centre and brings in a lot of people who would normally be regarded as centre-right type people, middle-of-the-road Tories, as well as the people who currently vote for us, liberal-minded people. The other alternatives is which is sort of what happened in the mid-noughties before the coalition era, is going for the big cities, competing with Reform, Jeremy Corbyn, the Greens in that kind of turf. And I would very strongly advise against that because I think it would make us completely incoherent. There's too much competition there anyway.
Yeah.
So I think where we are at the moment, expanding on it, is probably the best way forward.
So on this podcast, you are definitely hearing me talk about Bitcoin a lot. Well, why? We live in a really strange time with governments driving inflation with their reckless spending and endless money printing. There is a way out of this. There is a way to protect your money, and that is by stacking Bitcoin. I've made loads of shows about Bitcoin. You can go and research this, you can go and read the books, but the truth is it is the hardest money ever created. If you are interested in protecting your financial future, it's time for you to get on the Bitcoin train. I've been stacking Bitcoin personally and through my businesses since 2017. It's protected me, it's secured my family's future, and it also strengthens all of my businesses. So if you want to start stacking Bitcoin, where do you do it? Well, for me, it's with Gemini. They're a fully licensed, full reserve exchange and custodian, so they give you a secure way for you to buy and own your Bitcoin. There's no risks and no funny business. So if you're serious about stacking Bitcoin the right way, head over to Gemini.com, which is GEMINI.com. It's interesting how many options there are now for voters. Because traditionally, like when I was a kid, I first was voting. It was a choice of Conservatives or Labour predominantly, and then for some of my friends who were disillusioned with both those parties, they would vote Lib Dems. It was the kind of, like you say, the sensible middle road option, and then there was a little alarm. And then there were a handful of people who would vote for the Greens. But now there's Conservatives, there's Reform, there is Labour, there is going to be Jeremy Corbyn's party, your party, Lib Dems, Greens have grown a lot. There's a lot of options now. There's a lot of options for voters. Do you think that's a reflection of some of the disillusionment, this kind of shift?
Well, clearly there is disillusionment with both the Tories because of their period in government and with the Labour Party now, and it is resulting in fragmentation. And the problem I think we have as a country is that the voting system doesn't reflect that reality. It assumes that there is a two-party system, maybe with a smaller party to provide an option in certain circumstances. So that the system doesn't fit the public mood. And I think that's why we may, I think after the next election, probably not before it, there will be irresistible pressure to change the way that the voting system operates. You can imagine a situation in which Nigel Farage's Reform Party get, I don't know, 22, 23% of the public vote and get no seats in Parliament. Or they could get 30 and get all of them. You know, it's a crazy voting system that doesn't reflect people's choices. So if you're really going to make the public angry, the recipe is keep the current voting system, because it ensures that Parliament doesn't represent the country. So we're going to have to change it.
Well, you believe in proportional representation?
Well, yes. I mean, there are perfectly good models of how this can work. During the Blair period, he asked Roy Jenkins to set up a commission to look at the different options and came up with a version that was very like the Scottish parliamentary election or the German system, or slightly different, where you have plenty of space within the system to have 4 or 5 different options. And the consequence of that then is that to form governments, you will have to get parties working together in coalition. That's not totally straightforward, as I know, because I was part of one. But it probably is a better way of reflecting a public that is more fragmented, where people are wanting a wide variety of choice.
Yeah, I guess the argument against it is that a government with a majority can get more done. It's easier to get things done, whereas with a coalition, there's probably more trade-offs. Is it better to have trade-offs?
Well, I just simply don't think that's true. I mean, I don't know your views about the coalition years, but...
Well, let me hear yours first, and I'll tell you mine.
Many of the people I talk to, whether it's on the doorstep or civil servants, so on, who are part of government, thought of it that it was probably one of the best governments of modern time. Not that they like what we did, which is a different question, but in terms of actually functioning, making decisions and following through and delivering them, we were very good at that. And there were a lot of arguments internally, of course, and some of them spilled out into the public, and I was one of the worst offenders in letting my disagreements spill out into the public. But I said to my team, I mean, I had in my department, I think 7 or 8 ministers, of whom there were 2 Lib Dems and the others were Tories. I said, look, we may fundamentally disagree about a whole lot of things, but we leave the weapons at the door. And when you're in their office, we have to work together and make sure we deliver things that we've undertaken to do. And as a result, we got a hell of a lot done. Whereas what's happening now, and there's a lot of posturing and people making promises, and it's just not happening. So my only experience of coalition government is the one I was in, so I can't generalise, but certainly the one I was in was actually, I thought, a very good advertisement for that approach to politics.
So I don't remember too much about it, but I do remember at the time thinking what a great opportunity for the Lib Dems to be in government. And I felt sorry for the party because of the compromise that had to be made on free university places. I know a lot of voters felt like that was a betrayal.
Well, you can blame me for that, if you like.
Well, I was in the last year that got free university, the final year that got it. But I know that a lot of voters felt that was a betrayal, and it felt like at the time, whilst it was good for the Lib Dems to be in Parliament, it felt it felt like you took a little bit of damage from that period. At the
Oh
same
yeah,
time.
enormous damage.
Yeah.
I mean, it was almost fatal. But on the university thing, I mean, I had sleepless nights about this at the time and ever after, because I had to make the big decisions, or was mainly responsible as the Secretary of State. But the fact is, we made a stupid promise, which couldn't be delivered. Should never have made the promise. But having made a promise that couldn't be delivered, once in government, we had to do the right thing. And we did do the right thing. It was very unpopular at the time, though I think actually no longer. And it saved the university sector from bankruptcy, basically, which was where they were drifting. Make sure universities had plenty of money. There was no austerity in the university sector. There was big expansion of numbers, quality, the rest of it. Britain has world-class universities still, at least because of the decisions that were made then. And the students, because they tend to have relatively high IQ, quickly sussed on that we weren't actually charging them fees. We were introducing a kind of income tax on graduates, which, because they have to pay when they leave university, not to go. So in general, it was good. It was terrible politics for the Lib Dems, as for exactly the reason you suggested. But it was good policy. It was the right thing to do.
And I guess that's what makes the job so difficult. Then is that you're having to weigh up what as good policy versus what the public wants.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
How difficult is that? Because I as a voter might have my personal opinions and what I think politicians should do and have my criticisms, but I've not walked in those shoes. Like, how hard is it?
Well, it is very hard. I mean, my own experience bears that out. I mean, I got into government. I had to make a lot of compromises. I was actually much less happy than Nick Clegg and other people in the party going into power with the Tories, but actually that's what the numbers dictated. So I had to swallow my objections and go along with it. And we had 5 years of what I thought good but very difficult government. And at the end of it, I was punished by losing my seat in Parliament, which was, as any MP will tell you, is very painful and humiliating and all the rest of it. But rather than go off and tour the world or go to the House of Lords or something like that, I thought I wanted to win it back again, which I did, and with a big majority. And 2 years later, thanks to Theresa May calling an election when she didn't need to, and then within a few weeks I'd become the party leader, and I was able to eventually leave of my own choice, right? So yeah, politics can be very painful, and you do get punished if you become seriously unpopular.
Can it be enjoyable?
Well, not enjoyable in the sense of funny, ha-ha. It's. I think you get deep satisfaction when you do something good and you get something right. And I think, there are lots of things I started when I was in government which are still there and are doing good work. And you can also, I think, do good with individuals. I mean, some of the satisfaction that I now get from having been an MP for 20 years is I still live in Twickenham, and I walk down to the town centre and people come up to me in the street and say, we came to you 15 years ago with our problem of homelessness or whatever it happened to be, and you helped us, and we're now on our feet, and I don't know what you did or didn't do, but it worked. Thank you. And that is a really, really heartwarming feeling, and probably the best satisfaction you can get out of being a politician.
Do you recommend it as a profession?
Yes. I do recommend it with a tongue in cheek, because I have written a book I've written since I left Parliament, which is called How to Be a Politician. And my opening lines is a conversation with a teenage school kid who says, I want to be a politician, to which my answer is, really? And then I knock down I explain how difficult it is and how you can be despised by everybody, and you finish up being humiliated and thrown out on the streets. But at the end of it, on balance, when you take everything into account, this is something you can do where you can genuinely make a difference, and you can improve people's lives and make decisions that do actually change things fundamentally.
So does that mean you have to come in with the right intentions? So, should you come in with a sense of duty rather than a sense of
Yes,
career?
I think it has to be an element. I mean, none of us are, Mahatma Gandhi, right? I mean, when we all have ambitions, we all like to be comfortably off and so on. So motives are never totally pure, but I think you do have to have a sense somewhere of I would say public service rather than duty. The feeling you're not just doing this as a way of, advancing your career or making money. I mean, there are better ways of making money than going to Parliament, after all.
Yeah, I look at the pressure, especially now that politicians are under the extreme pressure, the social media side of things, the media side of things. It feels like a very, very hard job to do, because whatever decision you make, whilst you may believe in it, you still may upset a lot of people. And I think, I mean, we've seen some of the pressure politicians have put under. It seems immense.
I think in a way you can get the mettle of political figures by how they react when they finally go. I mean, one person who was roundly attacked when he was Prime Minister, and it was my job to attack him, was Gordon Brown. But since he left, he's done good stuff. I mean, he does a lot of very important work in development, also as a sort of thought leader in constitutional matters. And I contrast that with Tony Blair, who, when he left Parliament, left politics, he wanted to cash in on it. Right? Yep. Cameron did the same.
Yeah.
Theresa May was looked down on. Everybody made fun of Theresa May, very unfairly, I thought. But, she was somebody who had a real sense of duty and has behaved with impeccable dignity since she left. I think the worst, unfortunately, was one of your recent interviewees, Liz Truss, who, like everybody, made mistakes, or occasionally may have done something right, but it feels she has to go around the world telling everybody that she was right and everybody else was wrong. I mean, that's not a way to deal with politics when you leave it.
So we had Liz here yesterday, and I feel a little bit sorry for Liz in that she got the top job, but she didn't have it for long, and came under intense pressure and scrutiny. But since then, there has been some admissions that the cause of the market, the changing, was out of her control, and that the Bank of England was working against her. And so I can understand somebody who wants to defend their position when they feel maybe they were right and things were conspiring against them. Do you disagree?
I don't buy that for a minute.
You don't?
Absolutely not. No. I think she had some good qualities. I mean, I don't know her well, but she was in the cabinet when I was there. She had some good qualities as a person and some talents, right? But when you've had such a calamitous end, the thing to do is to step back a little and reflect and be self-aware and acknowledge that you may have made mistakes here, you may have done something right, but her instincts have been to spend the last 3 years rushing around the world telling everybody that she was right, that the markets and the Bank of England were wrong, and that it was all a vast conspiracy. And I mean, people are just laughing at her, and that is why it's sad. And I think, I also feel rather sorry for her. She's done herself down by blaming everybody else. I mean, the simple truth of the matter is that she was in exactly the same position as Gordon Brown was in 2008-9, as we were in the coalition government, as Sunak was, but Jeremy Hunt. We all had this problem that you're heavily dependent on the advice of officials and your contacts in the markets about what people will, what our lenders are willing to put up with. You know, the so-called kindness of strangers problem. Britain is heavily dependent on external capital in that way. And you have to listen to advice. I mean, it's just basic common sense. And we could, in the coalition government, have made ourselves very popular by just not doing all that difficult stuff around cutting public spending. But we realised you just had to do it and get through the pain and then get to a position where you could be more constructive and do positive things. But she just wasn't willing to do that. She just assumed, against advice, good advice, that all you need to do is to cut taxes and the economy will suddenly start growing. I mean, that was just, nobody believed that. And I just don't understand why she just can't step back and reflect a little and agree that that wasn't a very clever thing to do.
I want to talk to you about one of my sponsors, Incogni. And that means we're going to talk about the weird world of spam. And I don't just mean those spam emails that you get day after day from companies you never heard of and companies you've never signed up to. I'm also talking about those spam phone calls you get from those people who seem to know a little bit too much about you, trying to get your bank details. It's all a bit creepy, right? Now, this all comes from the world of data brokerage. There are companies out there collecting your data, building profiles, and sending that data to anyone who wants it, which is why when one of those scammers phones you up, they seem to know everything about you. Now, I've tried myself to get off these lists, try to get off the phone lists, try to get off the email lists. I unsubscribe from every one of these emails that comes in, but this game of whack-a-mole, it just never ends. And so this is where Incogni comes in. They do all the hard work for you. They reach out to these companies and they will get you legally removed from these lists. And I know because the last time they sponsored my show, I signed up and I didn't take the free option that they offered me. I wanted to pay for it. I wanted to see if you get value for money. And they removed me from 79 data broker lists. And so I've stayed on. I've stayed a subscriber and I have seen a massive decrease in the number of emails and phone calls I've been getting. So it's a great service. I recommend you check it out. If you're sick of this like I was, please head over to incogni.com/Peter and sign up. If you use the code Peter, you will get a lovely 60% discount. So that's incogni.com/Peter. But there have been people, there's been plenty of voices recently coming out in defense of her. There are people saying that actually Liz, she did rightly identify the problems in the economy. And I think both the FT and the New Statesman this week have both come out. They're kind of backhand apologies, but said, I think the FT said she would be right to be angry at what happened with the LDIs, that the Bank of England were essentially working against it. And I understand you don't think it's a conspiracy, but if we do look at, I mean, our 30-year gilts are now higher than when they spiked under her. So she did, I believe she identified a problem. And I'm not sure if she's trying to prove she was right or she's trying to say the problem still exists. We need to deal with this.
Yes. Well, you'll hear the same arguments for people on the far left.
Yeah.
Who say that all this stuff about balancing budgets and fiscal discipline, it's all crap. You know, it's all capitalists and bureaucrats working together and frustrating socialism, and it's all a vast conspiracy. And in a strange way, you know, you have people on the right and people on the left saying the same thing. That you can ignore advice and that they're all working against you. And I've forgotten, Michael Gove had a phrase for it about the blob, wasn't it?
The blob. I think Liv uses the blob as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, whenever a minister blames civil servants, I'm afraid I always take the view that that's a problem with the minister.
Okay.
I mean, I worked with civil servants for 5 years. You get good people, bad people in any walk of life. But actually, the collective spirit of those people is actually working in a wider national interest. I just do not buy the idea that they're... And the people in the Treasury in particular, you know, are very bright. I mean, I think they probably are in some ways over-conservative. I thought that in the period leading up to the financial crisis, they should have spotted more clearly that Britain was becoming dependent on the banking system for So, they do have their biases and they make mistakes. But I think in general, people in the Bank of England, the economic advisors, the civil service, they're good people, intelligent people, and we should start from that premise.
It's interesting because, again, this feels like another political divide, because people I speak to on the more conservative side thinks the civil service is too big and has a collective kind of left-leaning attitude, and then people I speak to more from the left think the civil service is very good and sometimes is a bit too conservative.
The people on the left I talk to always complain that they're right wing.
That's so funny that everyone sees them differently.
Yeah.
So you don't believe there's any reforms need for the civil services? That's not where the problem.
You should always be reforming and trying to improve professional standards.
But it's not where the problems are lying.
No, I don't think so. No, absolutely not.
So Vince, how do you be a politician?
Sorry?
How do you be a politician then?
How do you politician? Well, what I described in my book are the various steps that you have to get through. And the somewhat, you might think, rather banal conclusion is that probably the most important factor is luck. Because the first stage is the one that is rarely discussed in the media, which is actually getting adopted by your party for a winnable seat.
Okay.
There is one journalist, I think Michael Crick, who you may have come across, who runs a website describing who is being adopted where and in what circumstances. But that is obviously that's the crucial step. You can spend half your life going around the country standing in seats where you've no hope of winning and where you never win. The people who are far, far cleverer than me, I've met on the ladder, climbing up the first stage, and they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I mean, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time over a period of 30 years, and eventually, partly because I'm quite resilient and I kept going, and I had a lovely wife who kept supporting me, I was still there after 30 years standing, right? So I did eventually get in, but a lot of... That's the crucial stage in politics, which is actually getting the backing of your party to stand in a seat that you can win. And so little of that is actually discussed in the public.
Ian Dunt covers it in his book. He talks about this process. Yes. So, and I assume that means that you have, because the parties will be putting people in seats they can't win. So they can't. If you're put in a seat you can't win, they don't really think you're a particularly strong candidate. Yes,
but it's not. Most of these things. Well, certainly I can speak from Lib Dem experience, but these things are not centrally driven. Mostly, they're in some cases, The Labour Party particularly has a habit of telling somebody in Redcar or Rotherham, you've got to take X. But in my party, you never get away with that. It's sort of the local people are very, the local party in every village, has a very strong view about who they want their candidates to be. And they're often a strong preference for somebody local, with local roots who's been in local government.
Yeah, because we see that, say, with Nigel Farage, who took Clacton, a seat that he had a good chance of winning, but there's often complaints he's not there enough. He doesn't really understand the local issues, whereas our local MP is Yassin Mohammed, who is a local person who's known well. We also have Richard Fuller, I think he's North Beds. Again, he's local and locally known. I'm quite interested in local politics. I actually think we focus a little too much on central government and not enough local. I don't think we have enough local autonomy. I don't know if you...
Well, I strongly agree.
You strongly agree?
I strongly agree. Yeah, I mean, there are many things that could be improved in the UK, and I think one of the most important is the lack of meaningful decentralisation in England. Scotland was different, but... over the generations, more and more power has been sucked out of local government by right and left-wing governments. I mean, I don't think it's a party issue. And as a result, local councillors, I use the word infantilised, they've been left in a position where they're not allowed to do anything without government approval and are heavily monitored and overseen. So local government has had the guts torn out of it. I mean, I started my political life as a councillor in Glasgow in my 20s. And, you know, there are a lot of bad things, I mean, inevitably. There was a kind of Tammany Hall culture. There was quite a bit of corruption, you know, real corruption. You know, it was a labour machine. There was a strong belief that all you had to do was knock down slums and build multi-storey blocks. And it wasn't a terribly sensitive approach to housing. So the mistakes made, but on balance, they knew their city, and actually Glasgow emerged from its the depths of depression, which is probably the poorest city in Britain at that time, and is now in many ways quite a vibrant place, and partly because of the drive from the bottom, from good local people, not from people sitting in Edinburgh and London. So if the one big thing I would do if I was called back into government and put in charge, it's very improbable, would be to massively decentralise local government, give them much more freedom to tax and spend and to borrow, because that's what real devolution means.
Okay, so in some ways, similar-ish to the US model?
Well, the US has... the US is more decentralized. Bizarrely, the country that is very good at decentralization is China.
Okay.
I've just come from China.
And I'm obviously surprised to hear you say that.
Yeah, well, everybody's surprised when I say that. And, of course, the Communist Party runs the country, and the man at the top is immensely powerful. And the party has a strong grip on the politics of China. But economic decision-making is highly decentralized. You know, local mayors, local counties, they're constantly innovating, experimenting. That's partly why China's done so well economically. And that they have this saying that, you know, the emperor lies over the hill and far away. And, you know, people are, once you get away from the big political decisions, there's an enormous amount of active, locally driven economic policy, which is one of their great strengths and one of Britain's weaknesses.
Well, I was looking at the Swiss model.
Yes, well, that is another very good model.
Yeah, so I noticed with their model, with my research, and I probably have the numbers wrong, but something like 40% of their taxation and distribution is local.
Yeah.
Whereas I think it's only something like 4% in the UK.
Yes,
96
yes. The UK
model.
is the most centralised European country, apart from, I think, Malta.
A small island.
Yeah, that's right. And even France, you know, which we've traditionally thought of as Napoleonic and so on, has quite a lot of decentralized economic decision making. Denmark, yes, even a small country like Denmark has quite a lot of decentralization. Germany is probably a very good example.
Would those kind of reforms to give more power locally, would they be tough to make?
Well, it's difficult to make politically because, of course, it means you're cutting off your party activists. You're letting them off the leash, and governments are very reluctant to let go once they've got a hold on power. And I think Scotland's an interesting case, where Scotland is only a partial success story. Yeah, there is more powerful Scottish government, and so there is a strong element of decentralisation, but Scottish local government has been stripped of many of its powers, and key decisions about universities, colleges, even the police, you know, are made in Edinburgh by the chief minister or whatever they call them. So it's a complex story, but I think the general mantra I would have is, when in doubt, decentralise.
Yeah, I like that idea. My friend Balaji he talks about in the US there being two votes. He talks about you have the ballot vote, but you have the vote with your feet. And if you don't like the local laws or the taxation of the state you're in, you can move. And that creates a competition between states, which is something we don't really have here.
Yeah, and I think it's healthy, fundamentally healthy. And that's one of the good things about the United States. I mean, Trump is destroying a lot of that now. You know, the idea that you can just override some city government and send in the National Guard because you don't like what they're doing is completely destroying that American tradition. But the genuine American tradition of, you know, allowing states to go their own way and compete on tax or whatever it is they want is a good one.
You're not a fan of Trump?
Definitely not. No, I think it's doing terrible damage. I mean, it's not just you know, relations with the UK. I mean, one can argue about that, but the fact that he's destroying the brand of Western democracy, and also in the long run, and this goes back to my visit to China, we now have two superpowers in competition. Chinese are brilliant at pouring money into science, technology, innovation, and Trump is destroying his own country's capacity, slashing their defense budget, overriding scientists and so on. It's a terrible signal to the world, actually.
But he's at the same time, he's very popular in America at the moment. How do you square that?
Well, I don't. He has a very strong base. I mean, that is the problem. There's a very strong base. It may be, I don't know, 30-40% of the public. It's a big base. It's not a majority, but it's a very big base, and he serves them well, and he delivers on what they want.
Yeah. Just to finish off, because this has been great. It's so good to listen to somebody with a bit more experience in government. If you were to come back into government and you were to focus on specific reforms, looking at the general state of the country, what would you focus on now?
Well, you've got to, I think, probably start with the thing which is the source of everybody's frustration, with the fact that the economy isn't growing, and that lies behind all the difficulties about spending decisions and taxation. Government can't do miraculous things, but they can do a few sensible things. And I suppose what I would do was, first of all, I would set expectations at a realistic level, and I wouldn't overpromise. I would say, look, I'm here to do the best I can, and we may get the results in 5 years or 10 years, but forget the idea that I can deliver miracles tomorrow. I can't. Secondly, I would put a lot of emphasis on what I did myself in government, and this government has started but not really followed through on it, which is the industrial strategy. Concentrate on, fairly, you may think slightly boring issues like training and research and development and supporting the key industries of the future. There aren't many votes in it, but actually that's what's very important in the long run. So I would want to concentrate on that stuff. And I would probably overturn the promises that the Labour government made about taxation and say, look, I'm here. You've just elected me as a kind of centre-left leader. You had other choices. And that means I want this country to be a little bit more like Scandinavia and a bit less like the United States. And so I'm going to commit to raising more money through Tax A and Tax B, and we're going to use it to make sure that you have really... And I would concentrate on education rather than health, because that's for young people. But I would make sure that we then have decent services that are properly and honestly financed, so people know that they're having to pay for it. We're not taxing 5 people in the Caribbean to believing that somehow you can fund British public services like the Corbynites and even Nigel Farage. I mean, you've just got to be honest, right? We want decent services. We've got to damn well pay for it.
It's very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
just touching on that education piece, it's interesting you say that. I think we vastly underfund the education system. Yeah. But did you agree with VAT on school fees?
No, I don't actually. I thought it was. I can understand, in a sense, the motives, right? It is galling, I guess, if you're a teacher in a state school to have some of your more talented pupils just opting out and going private. But actually, I think it is a free choice. It is a reasonable choice to make. People are going to choose it anyway. Even if you abolished private schools, people would pay for their kids to have tuition, piano lessons, dance lessons, maths, and so on. You're not going to stop it. And I'm not even, whether I think the Labour government were dishonest about it, was this, they were somehow trying to pretend it's going to save money. Well, actually, no, because quite a few of the less well-off parents, the taxi drivers who've saved up to send their kids to some competitive private school in London, they're going to drop out and going back into the state sector, and somebody's going to have to pay for them. So it's not actually saving money. So I think both on practical grounds and on principle, I thought that the tax on private schools was a bad idea, and I opposed it. My party did also, actually, to give them credit.
Yeah. Is there anything you wish I'd asked you about that I haven't?
Well, you didn't ask me what I'm doing now.
Yes, let's talk about that.
That's not interesting.
No, it is. Let's talk about what you're doing now.
Well, I basically decided to leave Parliament and retire from politics. So I'm probably been a bit of a hypocrite. I shouldn't be here talking to you. I should be getting on with my non-political life. But I do two things, basically. One is I write. I've written, I think, 4 books. The latest one is about the rise of the new superpowers, China and India, and what it means for the world system. I've written about how to be a politician. I've written about great politicians who changed the economic weather, which include Margaret Thatcher, amongst other things, though I didn't personally agree with her philosophy.
What's the title of that book?
It's called Money and Power. And so I've been a writer, and I'm attached to various universities, LSE, Cambridge, Nottingham, where I pursue that. And the other half of my life, I'm trying to be a businessman, and having been Secretary of State for Business and lectured business on what they should be doing, I'm now trying to do it.
How are you finding that?
Very difficult. Very difficult. Trying to raise money for a startup in Britain is not easy.
What's the startup?
Well, one company I chair is a hydrogen infrastructure company. It's a new technology. Obviously, it's a high-risk area. So I do spend my time going around with a begging bowl, trying to get funds and rich individuals to invest. So far, we're surviving. And I chair a group of other companies who are introducing batteries into lorries. Eventually, diesel will be phased out, and we will need other fuels. And that's going reasonably well, but slowly.
Yeah, it's raising money is a very time-consuming process. Vince, great to meet you. Like I say, you're somebody who was a big part of a lot of my earlier years, not too early, but earlier years. And when I had the opportunity to meet you and interview, I couldn't wait. So thank you so much, and look, good luck with your business career. And I think Money and Power is going to go straight on my reading list. Is there an audio version? I tend to prefer the audio version.
I think maybe it was Atlantic Press.
Yeah, I'll check it out. But thank you so much, and good luck with your business career.
Good.
And thank you, everyone. See you soon.